Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Housing is still a topic, if not, frankly, an even bigger topic than it was a little while ago, because affordability is a big issue. But we're probably getting into a worse situation because condos aren't being built, and people are wondering about what's happening with single family homes. And so I thought it would be really interesting to check back in with Richard Lyall, who is the president of ResCon. He's a strategist with lots of great experience in the residential construction industry and the building industry generally. We chatted about 6 months ago, Richard, about where you thought the housing market was going. What do you think now?
Well, we are going in the wrong direction, but there are a few positive notes out there that I'll get to. But what's happening right now is not a surprise to us. We've seen this coming for a while because, of course, if you follow new home sales and apartment starts and things like that, we knew that things were falling off, and that lag effect between, because right now we're still building out projects that had been sold some time ago, more so on the condo side. So we'll still be relatively busy in 2025 building condos. Low rise really slowed down, and the only thing that's really happening there are projects where the builder just wants to build something and keep busy, keep some things going. And there's a few sort of hot market. Well, I don't want to say hot markets. I'm trying to be optimistic, but there's a few markets where you can actually make things work. Now, since we last talked, there's of course been quite a few developments that are very significant. We've been pushing the taxes, fees, and levies, the need for action there, because our taxes, fees, and levies just got too high. It was a runaway train. You
I'm
can't
told
have.
that if you
Yeah.
add up all the taxes, fees, and levies, you're at or above 30% of the cost of a new home is taxes, fees, and levies. Is that accurate?
Well, actually, what we did, and it was released about 3 weeks ago, Brian, we updated that report that had been done before, which showed it was 31%. It's now 36% because, of course, development charges kept rising, notwithstanding the fact that the market was going down, and which was very odd. And I think that's just a product of people not knowing how the housing market works, and really understanding market economics.
People
Excuse
or
me.
politicians?
Both bureaucrats, politicians, general public doesn't understand it. Housing is one of those things that seems to be quite simple on the face of it, but it's actually a very, very complicated thing to produce in its various forms. So we updated the report. It showed that's gone up even further. We did another report on a market outlook, which showed where things are going next year, which is the starts are going to be falling.
In condos or in single family homes as well?
Condos, single family homes are already way down. I mean, we've already finished building out much of what had been sold. There's a few projects that have been jammed because of a lack of allocation and final approvals on some things, because we still, even though there's been a number of changes to the Planning Act and development approvals processes and rules, it hasn't sort of worked its way entirely through to the front line yet. So we still are facing some of those problems, which can be quite frustrating. A lot of people don't realize that. They say, well, there's builders that are sitting on land, right? And they're not building, they're waiting for it so they can make even more money. Well, the reality is there's projects that have been stalled because they can't get these final approvals. On the paper, it says it's kind of looks like it's ready to go, but it really isn't. So we have had that
But in
challenge.
some
Yeah.
cases, they are finally approved. And
Yeah.
a couple months ago, was in a conversation with a politician who said, we've given all the final approvals and they're not moving ahead. I'm going to yank their approvals in a year if they don't proceed. And he thought that by threatening to yank their approvals if they didn't
Yeah.
build within the year, that would actually incentivize them to go ahead. What do you think of that?
Well, we commented on that at the time quietly. We try to, do things in a diplomatic way, but that was just a bad idea because one of the reasons why some projects haven't gone ahead is that the numbers didn't work anymore. And there are any number of reasons why what happened there. It could have been that it took too long to get approved, and then by the time it was finally approved, things had changed considerably in the world of finance and so on, and within the market. Because our economy's not doing terribly well either. That divergence that you and I talked about last time between Canada and the United States has continued to grow, which is sort of hard to believe, and it's at an unprecedented level. But people, 90% plus housing of all the housing produced is in the private sector, right? And it's subject to the rules of market economics. And if things change and, the project you had once contemplated that could have turned a modest profit is now going to be a loss, well, you don't go ahead, most of the time. I mean, I know some builders that are doing some projects right now where they're breaking even, but that's just because they want to keep some things moving. They want to hang on to some of their key people and keep them busy and that kind of thing. But so there's an explanation for that. But saying, though, not doing it, there's this sort of sophomore perspective and a rumor out there, that builders sit on land and they, that could happen and has happened in very rare instances. But the bottom line is builders want to build for a market, right? And if the market's not there or the numbers don't work any longer at the moment, then they won't. It can't.
So Richard, help me please. Why don't the
Yeah.
numbers work? What you've had is significant reductions in short-term interest rates. It's interesting that as the short-term interest rates have continued to decline, long-term interest rates actually went up last week, which is kind of interesting. But short-term interest rates have declined. You've got, yes, supposedly a affordability crisis, but that means that houses are really high priced relative to where they may have been in the past or where they should be. And so therefore, if you've got lower interest rates and high housing prices, why can't developers, builders make the numbers work?
So the rates haven't come down that far, and you're correct to point out that sort of interesting anomaly where the drop in rates really hasn't had the effect it's had. Yeah, sure, on variable rates and so on, but not on fixed. And I think one of the things that the market's seen there is, a combination of things. One is the rumored and soon to be real Trump tariffs, which are going to be inflationary. And one of the other things is our federal government, which has seemingly no control over its spending. And we're waiting for the report tomorrow that's probably going to show they've completely blown their own deficit targets from 6 months ago, and other related things to that. So, I think that the party could well be over on rates falling, right? If I want to call it a party, I think that's going to end soon. Personally,
Well, and I guess the market is saying that by way of keeping
yeah,
bond
the
yields
market's
high.
saying that, but people aren't saying that. Most of the commentary out there about rates is that they're going to fall further and we're going to get down to a certain level and so on and so forth. I'm not confident in that. And so you've got that picture there, and then there's the other stuff that's happening. But sorry.
So if rates falling the way they have, albeit not in the long end of the curve, only in the short end of the curve, haven't had a desired impact on getting people to be buying houses again, and high housing prices aren't an incentive. What is the problem? You've got, as
Well,
you say,
the high housing prices, if you look at that, what our report, the updated report shows, the biggest profiteer by far, a ratio of 4-1 to a developer's builder's profit, is the federal government. They've been making out like bandits for years on taxes on new housing, taxes that were, the sales taxes that were to have being adjusted for inflation in the beginning, and they weren't. The big problem here is we tax housing like no other jurisdiction does, with the exception of maybe Lower Mainland BC. It's a regressive taxation, generally speaking, when you look at it, because the people that pay the highest price on those taxes are the ones who can least afford it, which is terrible. And the numbers are huge. A down payment today is an increase in just two taxes in the last 10 years for a young family. And then they wonder why we have a housing crisis, and they keep having all these committees and meetings and reports. I mean, I got 3 more reports landed on me in the last month on the housing crisis and how to fix it. We're into this analysis paralysis stage, but the costs are just too high. Then you get the cost of red tape and delays, and we've measured that. But we still have now some changes have been made there, which are good, but we still have major problems there. Now, I think there's some very good signs on the horizon, because I think we've hit a wall and we are going to be forced to change. And some people are recognizing that. You've got Poilievre's announcement on relief on the HST. If he's elected, he will do that, which is great. You had the announcement out of the Liberal Party of Ontario just this past week that says DCs need to be cut with land transfer taxes. I could have fallen off my chair when I first saw that, because I didn't expect that coming from them. But these are now election issues, and we are going to have 2 elections next year. So these things will be election issues, and they will be subject to change. Like development charges. Anybody I talk to about that, even mayors, they know it's not the right system and the right approach. Evidence of that is what Stephen Del Duca did just recently as the mayor of Vaughan, where he cut DCs in half for the city of Vaughan, because he knows that nothing's being sold, so they're not getting any taxes anyways. And what's the problem? Well, it's the costs. So he's provided some real leadership there in doing that.
Do you think that that's going to mean that developers build homes in Vaughan that they wouldn't be developing elsewhere?
It's going to help. It's going to help. Now, it's not going to turn this thing around. So if you think of it this way, let's say we've got 10 major problems with housing, and the various levels of government are sort of chipping away at some of these different problems. But at the end of the day, though, the big elephant in the room is still the taxes, fees, and levies. We've got other problems, but if a down payment today is an increase in taxes over just 10 years, that is something it's wrong, and the numbers don't make any sense. And so that's pretty clear. That's something you need to fix. It's got to get done, and it will happen, because the numbers are crazy right now. I mean,
it is crazy. I saw a graph recently that showed inflation and housing prices in Canada and Australia versus the United States, and it was like the United States did have an increase prior to the 2008 what they call it, the Great Recession, but then came back down, and I've almost flatlined since. And Australia and Canada have doubled, if not tripled, on the index since then. And so, we've got an issue with housing affordability that just doesn't make logical sense when we're in the housing crisis that we are, and we are dramatically increasing our population. I heard a statistic that we're building the same number of houses today that we built in 1970, even though our population has doubled. I'm not sure if that number is right, but
that is correct. That is correct.
That's just incredible that we could possibly be in that situation. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Richard Lyall, the president of ResCom, and talking a little bit about what the heck's going on. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight about housing, our housing crisis, what's going on, with Richard Lyall, who's the president and CEO of ResCon, the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. We are in Richard, a per capita recession that people talk about, but with population, restrictions that the federal government has now announced, our population's going to go down or stagnate in the next year. Most economists think we're going to be in an actual recession. If not, we're actually in a recession right now. When you and I chatted back in June, you said that you were worried that what was happening with the housing recession is that we would have massive layoffs of people in the building trades, and that those people wouldn't hang around waiting for the recession to end. They would move. They would either move into infrastructure construction, they'd move to Alberta, or they'd move to the United States or somewhere where they could get jobs. Tell
Yes.
me, if you could, what's the prognosis for the industry in 2025?
I can tell you that I've been to quite a few meetings this past fall, or this fall, because actually we're still in the fall, with sub trades or subcontractors and so on. And it's almost like there's a bit of a shock setting in. It's almost like a cognitive dissonance. Because remember, we've had a bull market effectively for about 25 years. Few of us have actually seen. I mean, I was around in the early 90s when we had the last big correction, I'll put it that way. But no one's really experienced that. Most people in the industry today, including officials and politicians, haven't experienced it, much less really understand it. But what they're seeing is they're not getting asked to bid projects. The project pipeline has by and large dried up. And they're looking at or are on or have already passed the edge of the cliff. And I'll explain that. What that is that, remember what I said, low rise will build out what they've sold faster than high rise. So there's a lag in the high rise. So when we were saying this stuff a year ago, for example, Brian, when sales had already crumbled, and we were saying this is what's coming down the road, people weren't really getting it, because they're, even politicians who are still to this day saying, oh, we've got all these cranes in the sky, more than any other city in North America. Well, that's great, but as those cranes come down, they're not going back up, right? So it's a bit of a it's almost kind of a surreal moment for a lot of people. But where we're already seeing layoffs, by the way, on the low-rise side. We don't have a labor supply problem anymore. And then as the high-rise slows down, we're going to have layoffs there. Now, some of them and some of the workers, some of the trades in the low-rise, some of the workers have picked up work in the civil sector, which has been very busy in a lot of our infrastructure projects and stuff like that. And but ICI is not cooking, so you got a little bit of a pickup there, but eventually it's just going to be no work. And this is huge, because we know that unless they find work in construction fairly quickly, they got to put food on the table. They'll go to other jobs, other industries, other jurisdictions. So we've already had people moving out to like Alberta. Alberta's on fire right now. And they've gone out there, and the U.S. will pick up. The U.S. story is interesting. The U.S. has a housing crisis, and they call it a housing crisis, but their ratio of housing cost to income is much lower than ours. It's almost half of where we're at, and they overbuilt on rental housing down there. So you have, some of their fastest growing cities like Austin, Texas. Rents have been falling. Why? Oh, gee, the market worked. They overbuilt rental down there, which is okay. Markets tend to overshoot sometimes, and now prices are falling. But it'll pick
Down
up
over
again.
10%, I understand.
Yeah. But that's a functioning market. Our market was jammed and stymied and just loaded with red tape. In fact, to the point where, in an act of frustration, we served the city of Toronto. We're seeking a judgment against the city of Toronto over the green building standards, because it's just getting out of control. It's silly.
But
we can talk. Yeah.
Are people listening? You've talked about the mayor of Vaughan making some changes, but the balance of the municipalities have been still, increasing their development charges at outrageous rates and not changing. And I've got to believe that, given the slowdown in housing, even though their percentages are up, their absolute revenue from development fees is going to go down dramatically because no one's actually going to be paying them.
Yeah, not just that, too. The other thing that's going to go down is all the other taxes and fees and activity and economic activity associated with, the massive industry that we've had deployed building homes for so many years. That is going to hammer municipalities. A lot of them aren't getting it. Like, as I said, Vaughan got it and this is just a few weeks ago where they cut their DCs in half. Having said that, Peterborough 2 days ago increased their development charges by 48%. And this is a tax that is paid for by the consumer. Yeah, sure, the builder pays it up front, but it comes out in the wash at the end of the day on closing. It's a consumer tax. How on earth Ottawa increased their development charges five times this year so far? Where is that rational in any way, shape, or form? No, it's not. It actually reflects really some very deep misunderstandings about how the market works. Some people are getting, some are not. Now, the good news, as I said, there was some good news there, and I really want to lay on this, is what the federal conservatives did with their announcement on HST. Fantastic. What the might not be enough for Toronto, but and then you look at what the Liberals came out with, which was very positive. I mean, they've taken it on. So they've made the opposition parties have now made the taxes, fees, and levies an election issue. And I think that will result in, I'm being a little hopeful here too, but some significant change. But we're going to have to wait for the elections, right? And this is stuff, as you know, Brian, markets can turn very quickly, and especially financial markets and that kind of thing, and other things can happen. So, so we've got that big risk factor out there of Donald J. Trump, right, with his tariffs, they're going to happen in some way, shape, or form, and they will be inflationary. And combining that with, yes, we are in a recession, and combining that with the fact that our senior levels of government are running deficits, we don't have the flexibility to adjust and deal with some of these systemic events, sudden events that we used to have. So it's going to be particularly challenging. But so I think 2025 is going to be a rough year. There are going to be more and more layoffs as cranes come down. They're not going up. This most recent rate cut's not really going to help the housing market for a bunch of reasons. That's another conversation, a bit of an explanation there. But, so 2025 is really going to be rough. Now, what we do and what decisions are made by the provinces and province of Ontario in particular, and the federal government and municipalities next year. With municipalities, it might be imposed on them because the province does have the authority to do that. But what decisions are taken next year is going to determine when and how we might get out of this hole we're going into.
So I understand that pre-construction condo sales are down something like 81%. It's outrageous.
That's correct.
The crash. And I've been told that we have something like 9,000, 10,000 condo units right now that are for sale on the marketplace, and that we've got something like 20,000 units that are being delivered over the course of the next 14 months or so in the balance of 24 and 25, such that you're going to go from what's a typical inventory of 6 to 9 months to an inventory that's almost 18 months long of inventory. And pricing is down 20 to 30%, that the pre-construction condos were sold at over $1,000 a square foot. And resale condos are now in the $700 to $800 a square foot. So, if any of those are approximately right, this is crash territory, is it not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, we're in a major correction. It's just that it's a little insidious because it's not quite, you don't have that sort of immediate cause and effect because of that lag. So as you said on what's happening with the condo market, and there's more to be built. So you'd say to yourself, well, why would you produce 20,000 condo units in this market? Well, they've already been sold. It's already in the supply chain, as it were. They're going to get built. The problem is who's going to pick them up, right? Because the investors, for example, are gone, and a lot of these condos that were developed, they're not exactly family-sized units, and there's good reasons for that because the builders were building according to the market, right? And also there were various restrictions. We've been trying to deal with various restrictions that affect how these buildings are actually designed. For example, like there's various restrictions that actually almost encourage smaller units to be built. These are in codes and planning act issues and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a massive problem there. What we're working on, and that's a problem, and that's going to be a problem that's going to get sorted out over the next year to 2 years, right? What we're working on is to get new projects going forward. How do we do that, right? How do we lay the groundwork for new development? Because
Well, let's get
right now it's not and then the question is how bad off, like we've looked at the productivity numbers and the overall economy and that divergence from the US. We're just not competitive. Nobody's investing in Ontario unless they have to be here. There's a big difference on investment. I know you understand this. A lot of people don't understand it. The investment that's happening has to be here because they're here. They can't go anywhere else. They've got to renew stuff. They've got to build some new, whatever. But that's it, right? And we know what we did with immigration, which was a complete gong show. We know the immigration numbers, and I saw a chart the other day, which was staggering. It showed the massive increase in immigration, which I think was just done for purely economic and political reasons to boost their GDP numbers. Of course, people pointed out, well, that looks nice, but your GDP per capita is terrible. But that number went way, way up, and now it's coming way, way down. So we've got a lot of uncertainty there. Toronto, people make assumptions. Toronto's the city, one of the cities of the future and all this other stuff and whatever. We may have just killed the goose that lays the golden egg. And where that goes from here is a little frightening. Are we going to be a new latter-day Detroit? Detroit's on the recovery now, but there was a point in time where you had, fairly significant exodus from that city to other places. There's a bit of that starting here. And of course,
we've had out migration from Toronto
right.
for the first time in history, did we not?
That's right. And Mississauga too as well.
So I think that where we're going to go and how we're going to solve these problems is really a topic that we're going to have to focus on a lot. But let me just, before we go there, talk about the personal impact of this change, because I think that this needs to be focused on. So you talk about these condos being sold, and they have been, but they were typically sold, as you pointed out, to investors that put down what 10-15% of the purchase price, and still have to come forward with the 80-85% that they haven't yet paid, and they're contracted to pay. And they may not get the mortgage approvals. They may not have the cash. They may not be able to close, and then they're going to be subject to litigation from the developers. They're trying to sell those assets before they have to close through a vehicle called assignment sales. And the number of condos that are right now being tried to sell by way of assignment sales, I'm told, is at an all-time high. There's something like 10,000 condos trying to be sold as assignment sales, and there people are walking away from some of their deposit because they just want someone to take this liability, this obligation off their hands, even if they lose money. And then to make it further complicated, and I don't know if there's any statistic that bears this up, but a lot of these investors invested in these condos, and not just one, but sometimes several, by way of raising money on their home equity lines of credit. And so therefore they're at risk of losing their own home or having to sell their own home. So this is going to have over the course of the last couple of months and the next year, a real negative impact on people, is it not?
Oh, it's huge. It's crushing. I mean, not only do you have the young families, young people, and some of the first time buyers who, because of all these taxes, can't actually afford to buy anything, right? Because of the way that the costs that have you've got this other situation where you had people that invested in these things. You know, we through the economics of scarcity, we turned housing in various forms, especially condos, into an investment play. So somebody would put a down payment on a condo. They would buy the condo. I'm using italics here with my fingers, but they would buy the condo, but never with the intent of owning it or rent or anything else. They were going to flip it at some point in time because the market kept going up and up and up. And because we've had such a long bull market, no one's ever seen anything else. This was the thing. Why risk your money on the stock market? Why risk money starting a business, whatever? You could just do this and make lots of money, and it was great. And that is a huge problem. We created a bubble. And so, builders right now are doing everything they can to help people close if they can. But if they
But the
can't, then
incentives are
yeah,
unbelievable.
people are losing their down payments and then some. Because what's happened between the time they bought that condo and what its valuation is now has fallen. So it's not just being able to come up and carry it. They can't do that. And then, of course, rents are starting to fall in condos too, which is another interesting factor. Remember, rents were going up and up, and then they got crazy. They got crazy where to the point where young professionals couldn't afford apartments in Toronto. I mean, it was, something half
But
decent, right?
even though rents went up, and you're right, they're coming down,
Yeah,
CNBC came out with a report that said 80% of the people that were investors in condos that wanted to rent them out were cash flow negative. And so
yeah,
therefore they even these high rents weren't able to cover their interest
that's right.
payments and utility payments and the like. So I think this is a real, it's the old line about bubbles don't
No,
release gently.
no, they don't, and that's what we're going to be facing next year too. And I think there's going to be quite a few because there are people that are saying, well, we're doing this intentionally for some bizarre reason. You've got quite a few officials and bureaucrats that are in various departments in their own little silo, and they're just looking at that one thing, and they're not aware of all these other things and how it comes together. And then we've had the various levels of government sort of, as I said before, chipping away at stuff here when the big things haven't been hit yet. So if we can get all that right next year, um, uh, or fix a lot of that, that'll be good. We're still left with a mess though, right? It's
It's
like the
going to
cleanup,
be
you know.
it's going to
Yeah.
be a tough market. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit with Richard about what the potential solutions are to this problem. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Richard Lyall. He's the president of ResCon, which is the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. I've had the privilege of chatting with Richard before, and I think he 6 months ago, when we first chatted, correctly described the challenge that we were facing and are going to face even more, and it's regrettably come true. Let's, Richard, switch gears for the next couple of minutes if we could and talk about the solutions. I've seen building developments in the United States, and this attitude that development fees are because you got to pay for all the infrastructure of servicing development. You do have to pay for all that infrastructure, and yet in the United States and in other jurisdictions, they've got different structures, different ways of doing it, and impact fees that one pays in the United States are like $1,000, $2,000. They're next to nothing compared to what you have to pay in Ontario and as you pointed out, the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. So how are they paying? Is there a better way of paying for municipal infrastructure than our current system of development fees?
Well, let's start with our current system. It is broken. It's an abomination. It's entirely regressive and punitive. The people that, so for example, a development charge on a two-bedroom luxury condo that could be, millions of dollars is the same as a two-bedroom unit that's close to being an affordable unit, right? And so the people that are getting hammered the most are the ones who can least afford it. So we need to fix it. It became a runaway train. This whole notion of growth pays for growth and the cries of let the developers pay was like it was almost something out of the it's like the French Revolution or something. It was weird. I don't know how, in the industry, like our group is really concerned with construction and building. We weren't really involved that much in some of these other issues. We are now, because that whole notion of growth pays for growth was distorted and perverted. You can't put all the costs of growth on new home buyers and renters, and that's what we were starting to do by and large. Because growth benefits entire communities. You don't force the new home buyers and renter to pay for the new community hospital, even though they're going to use it, but the community uses it too as well. So what this was used for, it became, like, as I said, perverted. It needs to be fixed. We tax housing. You've heard me say this before, like alcohol and tobacco. That is insane. Housing is a need in economic terms. It's not a want in economic terms.
So
It's
what's the
like
solution? How do we
you
pay for
got
that hospital, that library, that fire station?
well, we managed to pay for them before, Brian, without all these development charges. There wasn't some other thing that was out there. There's a few things that have to happen here. One is that these taxes, fees, and levies have to be cut, and I mean seriously cut. And then the funding formula to that in the alternative, a funding formula in it has to be created so there is a sustained and predictable level of funding going into infrastructure and so on and so forth. But one of the things that happened here was property taxes weren't adjusted upwards to pay for a lot of things that community needs and so on and so forth. They really poured it all on the new home buyers and renters. And so that needs to be fixed. And I think there's a ton of waste and duplication between the three levels of government on various things like climate change. Everybody's all over climate change. The municipalities are all running around right now hiring consultants and setting up their own climate change building conditions and so on and so forth, which doesn't make any sense at all. That we already have a level of government that is responsible and tasked for that. Well, the federal government's responsible for environment overall, and the provincial government controls the building code and the Planning Act. So why are the municipalities doing that stuff and spending a lot of money doing it? The waste and I don't have to tell you about waste at the federal level. It is just mind-boggling. So it's not that there's a lack of money in the system. It's there. And in fact, a lot of these development charges are sitting in reserve funds held by municipalities right now. They can't spend it all. And so that needs to be fixed, that whole environment. But the taxes, fees, and levies on new housing has to be cut. If we taxed housing like that, there would be riots in the street. If we treated the food supply chain like the housing supply chain, people would be starving right now. That's how bad it is. It's
I
sort
think
of,
one of the reasons
yeah.
why is that politicians get away with blaming developers, saying
Oh, yeah.
that the rich developers are going to be paying these development fees. And they don't realize, and or the public isn't told and or realize that it's actually, as you say, this regressive taxation that's paid for by
Yeah.
way of the young people that are entering in the market, newcomers, renters that want to get into the housing market, etc. We don't see it, or at least we don't realize that it's
Well,
this incredible regressive tax that it is.
that's right. And Brian, people have said to me, well, why didn't you guys say something before? I said, we've been saying things for years. I got reports going back to 2010 on this, and even before that. about the problems with, I'll call it the housing supply chain and things, but it's coming from a builders group. So are we? No, we're just trying to feather our own nest, make even more profits. A month ago, I got a note from somebody who should know better, saying, "Hey, do you think it's possible if the builders just shave their margins a little bit to build some more affordable housing?" And I said, "There are no margins. What are you talking about?" And in fact, when the most recent report we did, the update on the old report shows that, the federal government again are the big profiteers on housing, followed by other levels of government. The builders and we should have probably marched on Queens Park a few years ago or something like that. And the industry, went along with a lot of things. I think a lot of people went along with a lot of things as long as prices kept going up.
Yeah, as long as
But
prices kept going up, you could afford it. I do
yeah,
think that there are
we were
models that
looking at that. And I can tell you in our boardroom, we were looking at this and we were going, this party's going to be over. Now, as you know, bubbles always go higher and farther than people expect. And then when they crash, it's harder and longer. So we're in the downstroke right now. Get
I do
started.
think that I
Yeah,
do think there are models elsewhere that are
absolutely.
a better way of financing municipal infrastructure, and we
Hey,
need to look at them. In the United
Brian,
States, what typically happened is you
yeah,
get municipal tax bonds that are issued
that's right.
that are paid back by property taxes over 20, 40, 50 years that fund infrastructure, and it's on
Yes,
the whole community, not on just the newcomer. So I think that there's better ways to do it. But let me ask you a different question as well.
yeah,
StatsCan and CMHC have said that it takes longer to get approvals to build housing in Toronto and Vancouver and Victoria, Mississauga, than anywhere else in the Western world.
that's right. Hey,
Is
look,
is this red tape and regulation and extra time doing us any good? Like, does it get us better housing?
no, it doesn't.
Then why do
It's
we
a
have it? If it does us no good, why are we the longest place in the world to get housing approved?
Parkinson's law, Brian. We've got the most decentralized government in the Western world. And the problem that creates, especially if you don't have the right accountability built into the process, is you get that duplication I mentioned. Plus, we've got so many agencies, boards, and commission, much 3 times the amount of more advanced jurisdictions involved with their fingers in the decision and approvals pie. That's a huge problem. And Parkinson law says that if you create an entity, it could be private sector or public center entity, it's going to seek to grow. So we've got these various departments that we don't need them. They shouldn't be in the process needs to be trimmed down. And yes, we are the worst. And yes, it's been measured by the World Bank, and the OECD has already identified us as having the worst. I mean, the World Bank, we rank 64th, and the OECD, we're second last in approvals. It's scandalous. Like, it's just atrocious that we're at that stage. So, can that be? Yeah, there's a huge room for opportunity there. We've been pushing digitization for 10 years. We've done research on, we've showed that, the process is taking longer and longer, and it's very expensive because you got to, there's a cost to delays. I don't have to tell anybody that, hopefully but still
But
today,
yet the public
yeah.
seems to, want those delays. The public gets involved in public meeting after public meeting after public meeting
uh,
and
the,
opposing things. The public
the
doesn't want development to take place.
That's the public meeting gong show system we've got, because research has showed out of the Harvard housing group down there, for example, and other places, that these public consultations are gong shows, because guess who shows up? The NIMBYs in en masse. And it's only recently that that's been counterbalanced by some millennial groups that have started, or who are really engaged in housing, like More Neighbors Toronto and Toronto New Liberals. They're doing fantastic things on that score. But that's what happens with these public consultations. They need to just cut that stuff out. Increase the as of right conditions where you can do things. I just got back from Tokyo, Brian. Get a city with the population of Canada in it. They don't have a housing crisis. The city works like a Swiss clock. They've got incredible transit systems, mobility. It was like being in a science fiction movie, but on a lot of smaller projects, uh, you barely even need a building permit there. There are other sensitivities, but they get things done. They've gotten housing built. So, yes, there is a housing crisis in many parts of the world, but not all. Ironically, the really hardest hit areas have been the US, Canada, England, Australia, and New Zealand. All have a very common legal planning development systems. And it's within those systems that you have the problems, and they need to be fixed, and they can be fixed. But one of the problems we've had with our system is no one's actually really responsible for housing overall. And that needs to happen, where we've got somebody at the 30,000 foot level that has some authority over some of these things. And there needs
Well, and
to
I think
be,
that
yeah,
it's changing attitudes as well. You know, it was
yeah,
a
oh,
year and a half
absolutely.
ago that the prime minister said the federal government has no responsibility for housing, and then changed their mind, and the whole budget was almost all about housing. We had, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the Housing Affordability Task Force reported to Queen's Park with 57 recommendations. Something like six were implemented of the 57, and one of the big ones on development charges was reversed over time. And so,
Yeah,
we end up having this sort of, I'll take responsibility. I won't take responsibility. I'll change like no one seems to have the right strategy. But I got to ask you, as we
yeah.
go through this situation, you didn't post this, but you reposted recently a comment that this is leading to intergenerational inequity and a risk of civil unrest. I want to take a break for some messages, and when I come back, I want to ask you, are we at risk of civil unrest because of this intergenerational inequity where my kids, your kids, can't afford a house in anywhere close to Toronto where they want to work? And what's going to happen with this all? Stay with us, everyone. Back with some concluding comments in 2 minutes.
We good?
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Richard Lyall. He is the president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. Richard, you, as I mentioned just before the break, reposted. So you didn't post it, so I can't blame you. But you reposted someone who said that this housing situation, because of the taxes, because of the delays, because of the high housing prices, because of the lack of building, the lack of supply, is leading to a intergenerational inequity such that we're the first generation in history that is leaving a worse future to our children. Every other generation has left a better situation to our children, and that this could lead to civil unrest.
Well, I can tell you first off, it has in a measurable way led to some serious mental health issues. And part of the reason for that is you've got young people who've come up, they've done everything we told them to do. I'm talking about the stars now, like our STEM graduates, 2/3 of which who will not have parental support when it comes to buying housing, for example. So they've just killed it, right? They're superstars. And now they've graduated, and now we're throttling them with the housing situation. It's unlike, and what, back in the day, I was working as a construction worker. I worked in a hospital. I was going to U of T. I got 2 degrees. I was on the rowing team. I had a part-time job. I had an apartment and I had a car, and I graduated after 2 degrees with a little bit of debt, which I paid off in 6 months. That was my reality back in the day. And there were tough times around then too, and so on. But that's nothing compared to what these young people are facing today. It is absolutely heartbreaking. Most of them, from what I understand, anecdotally and in various reports, they either want to leave or are planning to leave, right? And who can blame them? The other thing is, I think we're already seeing civil unrest. I think when you look at the rapid rise in crime rates in Toronto, and in fact, apparently our crime rates are higher than the US. which is who would ever thought that would have happened? But I think that's a reflection of the economy. And of course, the biggest thing in the economy is what people spend most of their money on is housing. So I think the civil unrest here is here already. I don't think we're going to have European type marches down, boulevards with water cannons out or something like that. But we're seeing it already, and it's not getting better. I mean, you hear the reports from public transit. I mean, how bad can public transit get? The unreliability is astounding. And then the things that happen on public transit now are awful. Now, maybe they're exaggerated, but I've had some personal experience there, and I've talked to people who also have had that. So people don't want to ride, so, and then we have all the other associated problems. But I think we're playing with fire here. And then when you have a minister of immigration federally just a year ago saying they're going to start aligning housing policy with immigration policy, I mean, that was just spectacular. I mean, you mean you weren't doing this before? And then we know the story on healthcare. There was no consideration to healthcare whatsoever. So, like, the mismanagement at the federal level, and this is, forget about politics, the numbers all show this. We are in such bad shape right now. Now, the good thing with all these things, they can be fixed. And we know how they can be fixed. So, but yeah, it's tough.
I hope you're right. I really hope you're right. I saw the statistic just this last week that there was something like 2,600 break-in entry
Yeah.
robberies in just Mississauga and Brampton in 2024, and the year's not over yet. That's like 8 a day.
And it's not just that. I mean, we're talking guns. We went light on crime. The federal government went light on crime, and they have unleashed terror, on our society now, where people are fearful. The consequences for crimes are just not there. And so when you have a very tough economy with not much in the way of opportunity, people will turn to crime.
So,
Yeah.
Richard, last question.
Yeah.
We've got high taxation on housing. We've got slow approvals, worst in the Western world, longest in the Western world. We've got a condo crisis, and prices are falling, and construction is drying up, and cranes aren't being re-put up. We've got a crime problem. We've got a per capita GDP challenge where incomes haven't risen in more than a decade on a median basis. We've got a per capita recession that's probably going to turn into a actual recession once population increases come back. Are you hopeful for 2025, or are you scared to death of 2025?
2025 is going to be a rough year. Very difficult. You've got the various problems that have to get sorted out. We're going in the wrong direction. It's what we do in 2025 that rough year, that's baked in, that's coming. But what we do in 2025, we got 2 elections. We got to get real about housing and housing costs, and we got to get real about some of these other goofy things, that have been happening that we're spending money on systemically. I mean, 1 in 4 Canadians basically gets a paycheck from government, which is crazy. And that's one of the reasons why our productivity numbers are so bad. I mean, they're, like, our productivity is just falling. It's almost in a free fall. The US is still going up. And the gap, and it's still growing, is unprecedented. Go back 100 years. You don't have this. The cost of housing to incomes, unprecedented. We're at a 10-to-1 ratio. The US is about 5-to-1. Historically, it should be around 3-to-1. And that's where it was for many, many years, give or take. You got a few movements up and down there. But these things are, and the numbers are massive. The scary thing is you got a lot of people that they're just checked out, or they don't realize it, or they're just myopically focused on their one little area, right? And so next year, what decisions we make about these things, and there's some tough decisions to make. I don't think they're tough, but personally, but they, in the eyes of many, they will be tough. We've got to make those decisions. We've got to streamline. We need to get into the top 10 in the world, not be at the bottom 10, where we've been languishing. And we've got to get smart on things like digitization and modernizing our processes and streamlining them. Cut down that list of junk you need to get something approved. Make it easy up front where you can do a risk assessment on a new project. Come up with new funding formulas and bonds and the kinds of things that you were just mentioning. There are other systems in the world that work just fine. Why can't we avail ourselves of what other jurisdictions are doing right and adopt them here? Why do we have to keep remaking the wheel? It's like, it reminds me of the Presto card. We had to spend how much money on that to build our own when we could have just licensed something somewhere else? And that's been multiplied many times in other areas. Look at our transit spending and our transit costs for new developments, how long it takes. I mean, the provincial government's really driving a lot of projects there, which is great, but we got to get those costs down too, because they're, comparative to other jurisdictions, we're spending way too much money on that. And we can't even, look at that Eglinton rail. I mean, it's a laughing stock of the world. I mean, they don't even know when it's going to open. Maybe it won't open. Who knows, right? So we have to get better, and there has to be consequences. I had a good sign the other day. Toronto District Catholic School Board is hiring private investigators, and they're firing teachers that are gaming the system. Never thought I would have ever seen an article like that, but that's the kind of thing that has to happen. When was who was, there are some people that need to get sacked because things aren't happening the way they should be happening, and they're being mismanaged. That wouldn't occur in the private sector. But if you think of some of these big, like at the federal level, the last thing I saw was the people that were managing the ArriveCam app and all that stuff actually got promoted. You can't make this stuff up, right? So we got to get a little tougher, and I think necessity is going to drive these changes. It's not because someone had an epiphany and, this is the right thing to do. It's just that it's going to get that bad. And by the way, Brian, you've heard me say this. We hit a tipping point in 2023. That was the turning point. It's just a lot of people didn't realize it. And the turning point was when the sales collapsed. Right. So, and we're working on stuff on all these areas, by the way. I can say that too. We need to get technocratic on some stuff. Housing is a need, of course, and it should never have been the investment play it became. Of course, there's always an investment consideration with housing. Somebody buys a cottage or maybe a rental project or something like that. But it became our number one industry, and housing should not be any jurisdiction's number one industry or a nation's number one industry. That's crazy. And
Richard Young,
so, yeah.
the president of the Residential Council of Ontario, thank you so much. This has been a really sobering conversation. And I think that politicians need to hear you, but the public needs to hear you, because I think that 2025 is going to be a tough year. But sometimes toughness is what, and tough times is what it takes to make needed changes. And
Yep.
and hope you're right that those needed changes will be announced, will be promoted, and will be voted on, and we'll have some important changes. Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. All of my podcasts and videos get posted on YouTube and podcast servers, and more than half of all the people that listen to me actually now listen through podcasts and YouTube. So check me out on all those services as well. Thanks.
Wow.
Good night, everybody.